I think we're going.
All right, we're good to go. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and share the deck now.
Why don't you just say hello and welcome people to introduce yourself.
Right, yeah. Okay, I'm Judy from Civic Makers. Thank you for joining our first webinar of the Startup in Residence program. This is on product development, and this is Lawrence, my co-host, if you will.
I'm pressing the buttons.
Button presser, yes. And then we have some folks in the room, and we'll get to that as well. I'm gonna go ahead and share our slides. And if there are any questions, you should be able to type into the chat box.
Yes, just give me 1 second here. Excuse me. We have the cell set up. We had 1 minute to go before the start time, so we're still working out a couple of the kinks. Assuming it's this.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Sure. Let's just go to this.
All right, great. Okay, again, this is the product development training for the Startup in Residence program. And we are going to tell you a little bit about the mission. For those of you who don't know, Startup in Residence brings together government and startups to explore ways to use technology. This is a 16-week program across 4 cities. Some of the goals are building bridges, empowering city departments, and giving startups and tools more insight. You can follow more of Startup in Residence at SF Moki and hashtag STIR2016 if you would like to share any of your learnings from today. As I mentioned, there are 4 cities that are participating: San Francisco, City of Oakland, San Leandro, and West Sacramento. And before we get started, I just wanted to share some upcoming events. We have a Skillshare at the Department of Technology next week featuring Bays Impact, which is one of the startups working with Oakland and some of the good folks at SF Department of Technology. Then we have another STIR training coming up on August 18th around pitching to government buyers and stakeholders, helping our startups get ready for Demo Day, which is in September. And then on Thursday, August 25th, we have a fireside chat around investment opportunities. You can find more of these events at Civic Makers. We have them all in Eventbrite. And now I wanted to get to who is in the room. Apologies for the formatting errors there. So we have Michael Solomon from the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and Ashley Myers, a product manager with the City and County of San Francisco. They will be going over the housing portal project, so you'll hear from them first. Then we'll hear from Tiffany Andrews, a front-end developer and product manager from Code for America. She's going to walk us through some road mapping and give us an exercise. Then we'll hear from Cindy Conway, our IS engineer at SF Department of Technology. We won't have Matt Hill with us today, he's out sick, and they will be talking about accessibility and compliance standards. So without further ado.
Thank you. So just speak into that loudly so people can hear you on that microphone. Sure.
Yeah, and if you want to give a brief intro about yourself and what you're working on, that would be good.
Okay. So I'm Michael Solomon. I'm with San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, which runs all of the affordable housing programs in the city. And we'll get to that a little bit later, as well as community development block grant programs. And with me is...
My name is Ashley Myers. I'm a product manager here in the Department of Technology, working on a couple of sort of public-facing city services that we are working on delivering digitally.
So as one of my tasks in OCD as their one IT project person is to help either develop or purchase or customize products that they need to run their programs. So what happened is we needed a solution to the affordable housing crisis in the city, especially around thousands and thousands of people sending in applications for like 1 unit or 2 units and doing everything on paper, and it's being very inconvenient for everybody. So we decided to create a new digital service for San Franciscans in search of affordable housing. So, this is actually part of the mayor's, plan to, basically, 30,000 units are going to be built within the next few years, and actually a lot of them are being built now. How do we administer our programs and application processes and everything to get the right people into the right units who need affordable housing? So, for example, just to give you an idea, here's a San Francisco Chronicle article. This was one below market rate rental opportunity that had 18 units and actually over 2,500 applications on paper, big packets with income information and asset information. So a lot of work for the people who have to review those, and a lot of kind of pain for the people who have to submit them. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner there's a little drum. We hold lotteries. That's how we know out of those thousands of people who can get units. We hold lotteries. There are literally paper tickets in there that get pulled one by one until today, until this month. We moved over to electronic lotteries finally, and that's part of the system. Okay, so now I am a San Francisco resident. I am in need of affordable housing, and I'm in trouble. I'm getting kicked out. I'm losing my job. Where do I go? Where do I do? I mean, this is literally like all these tons of resources I have to just kind of find or know about to figure out, how do I get my needs met? So one of the goals of the housing portal is to get as many of those resources into one place. We want to, of course, put listings and applications online, but we also want to give people a one-stop shop for all kinds of housing programs, so that they don't have to go through what I just showed you, and because people know I need help. They don't know they have to go here for this thing and there for that thing. So we're hoping to be a one-stop shop. We're also hoping to get rid of the tons and tons of paper that are used throughout our processes. That's why we're going digital. And the goal is to really provide a digital service for people who are looking for affordable housing, that's just as smart looking and just as awesome as anybody looking for, market rate housing. In other words, this site isn't just for rich people. So we want a very nice experience for our users too, so that there's no feeling of, lower than or anything like that. This is all good quality, high quality stuff we're going for. I mean, this is what they should be seeing when they look for housing in San Francisco, affordable housing. So as I said, the vision of the project is to support the mayor's goal of housing for all by creating a streamlined, welcoming digital service for all San Francisco residents accessing affordable housing. This is the front door to the new site, and we call it Dahlia, the database for affordable housing listings, information, and applications. It's the San Francisco Housing Portal. So people, as you can see, can come here to this very simple page. There's like 4 buttons, a few instructions, and easily get to where they need to go. We'll talk about user-centered design in a few minutes. That was key to our process. We wanted to address the fact that there's all different kinds of users at all different kinds of ages with all different kinds of abilities. And so we kind of did a lot of testing and figured out, this is a good approach to address those needs. Here's a sample of what a listing would look like on our site. And again, a lot of testing to get to this format. So here's what I want to talk about, though, is a lot of work went into get just what you saw and just that little bit. And to get there, we're using the Agile process instead of the waterfall process, which Ashley's going to talk about. And just to say that the biggest difference is we are working with Agile. We are working with smaller chunks of work, with a lot more testing and finding problems early on. versus the old way, which was waterfall, which is basically me sitting there writing a 200-page document with requirements and then handing it off, and maybe in 6 months we might get something we need, which usually is not what happens. And again, as I said before, this approach is committed to user-centered design, so nothing gets built until we have users test it. And therefore, we don't run into that problem of building something, putting it out, then hearing all the complaints, and then having to go back to the drawing board. And the other thing about our particular tool is most of our users, we know the vast majority of the users for affordable housing will have mobile devices versus desktops or something. So we're doing a mobile-first design. It's all responsive design, but we decided to concentrate on mobile since most everybody has that versus desktop. All right. And this is very important. The service itself, we've been evaluating and redesigning from the ground up. So in other words, we didn't just take what the group is doing in my team and translate it to electronic. No, we looked at what they're doing and saying, what could we do better? And here's Ashley.
Great. So I want to dig in deeper to two of the things we're doing differently in our product development that Michael mentioned. The first, agile development instead of the old waterfall way of working here at the city, and then the second, user-centered design. So first, agile development. So when we talk about waterfall, this is sort of the workflow that you guys people on the phone or listening may have used when doing software projects before, which is that, each step sort of cascades to the next. All the analysis is done, and then all the planning, and then all the designing, and then all the building. And as Michael's mentioned, like that usually in the city means writing a very, very long RFP where you try to exhaustively catalog all the requirements you need before you even start any build work. And this means there's no way to quickly validate predictions or assumptions that you have. It means that you then invest time and money on some predictions or assumptions that are wrong because you wrote those requirements without testing. And it's a really risky approach. Less than a third of waterfall procurements succeed in industry studies of government waterfall procurements. So here on the Housing Portal, we are doing agile software development where we let our requirements and solutions evolve as we go. And we have sort of a cross-functional team that self-organizes and collaborates. So this is what the flow looks like for agile versus waterfall. So on the Housing Portal, we're doing 2-week sprints. So every 2 weeks, we do this process at the bottom. We take a small chunk of the product, we analyze what users will need by talking to users, make some plans. We create designs and show those designs to users and iterate on them, and then we build and test that small little chunk of the product. And at the end of the 2 weeks, it's actually done. So for example, this 2 weeks, we were working on our accounts functionality, and just in this 2 weeks, they're building the functionality to sort of like log in, see your past housing applications, start editing a new application, or start editing an old application. These 7 or 8 little small pieces that we've broken out that they will actually have completely done in 2 weeks. And they won't work on anything else in these 2 weeks. Rather than trying to get like everything we could ever possibly need done over the course of 6 months or a year or 2 years. So, if you haven't heard about Agile versus Waterfall before, some other sort of like comparisons and stats for you. Some people may be familiar with this and others maybe not. It's really becoming best practice in government. It's been best practice in the private sector for over a decade. And so we are really proud on the Housing Portal project to be practicing it in a pretty disciplined way. This is written sort of generically, what are the benefits for government, but I would want to just talk about what the benefits are for us. So we are controlling priorities, so we're getting what we need more quickly. And I'll show you an example roadmap where I describe that. But we didn't ask the developer to work on like a huge thing and then they decide what they do first. Like they're going to finish stuff and hand it over to us again every 2 weeks, and we're releasing every couple months. That means we're reducing risks and adjusting course by identifying issues earlier. And we're saving money because we're not building anything unless users need it. So we're actually testing with real housing applicants. And we shipped a working product that we released to the public we released it 3 months later. It was done in 2 months and we tested for about a month, which is much faster than digital projects that the city have proceeded in the past in our experience. So here's an example roadmap. Our roadmap will end up being way more than 14 lines, But this is the stuff that our stakeholders and our budget holders are constantly asking us about. And all the time they say, will the system do X or does the system Y? And the answer is always like, it could if you want, like if you tell us to build that, you know. And like, do you want us to do that before or after we do ABC? And really forcing them to decide what we build next. And so the way Agile works, we picked the very first tiniest little sliver and we called it our minimum viable product, and that was listings of affordable housing opportunities, one kind of affordable housing opportunity, inclusionary rentals. And we chose to only work on that part before we moved on. So that was actually released to the public before we even started working on part 2, inclusionary rentals short application. So for that first, housing listings, we are actually doing these little sprints. We're analyzing, planning, designing, building, testing, and then deploying on listings. It took us 4 of these cycles, so 8 weeks, 4 2-week sprints to get those listings done. And then now we're working on the next one, which is the short application. And we finish them and release them before the developers move on to the next. The designers have often moved on early, so the designers are done and have moved on to the next thing while the engineers are finishing up the work. So if you're nodding along and you're like, this all sounds great, how do I do it? We sort of came up with 2 questions that we think really are critical to our success on the housing portal. And the first is having the bandwidth to be an involved, available product owner. And the second is being committed to doing meaningful user testing. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Michael, do you want to talk about your role as the product owner?
So, and it's interesting, being a product owner on an Agile project is very different than on a waterfall project. So with an Agile project, you're actually really involved with the nitty-gritty of the everyday stuff that's going on with the developers and the designers. So instead of, hey, again, you know, here's a bunch of requirements and come back to me with questions and hopefully we get what we want. I'm in it every day with our various developers and the team. The developer teams have what's called scrums every day, 15 minutes checking in, making sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Every 2 weeks, we do sprint planning. So we get to, as I said, we get to prioritize what's coming up next in the sprint rather than being told by the vendor what should come up, although we do take their feedback. We write user stories. So think of user stories are small requirements. So instead of a 100 or 200 page document, it's literally a paragraph or less. As a user, I'd like to see my name after I log in, or maybe a little bit more than that, and then that would be a user story, and you just kind of build those. And there's an example. Okay, as an admin, I want to see live call center metrics data so that I can make informed decisions about the performance of call center agents. And then so there's your user story. Okay, how do we know it's done? We write up acceptance criteria. If these 2 and sub things are done, then yes, the developers did their job, and we can move on to the next user story. And you move faster. And then the thing is, you don't move on from that until it's done and it works. So you don't get too far ahead of yourself. One of the cool things we also do is it's called sprint retrospective. So every 2 weeks, everybody gets together and we talk about what did we like, what did we dislike, what did we wish happened, and then what are people going to do over the next 2 weeks. And it's really cool because it's a space where people can speak honestly. And we do get, it's actually interesting. People are very honest about, hey, gee, you didn't deliver, or I had a problem with this. And it fixes the problem really early on in the process rather than when it's too late. So the big change here
for folks in government who manage projects like this is that instead of spending months and months collecting requirements to write your RFP or your scope, you will be spending a fair amount of time during the development really helping. You're almost writing those requirements in little pieces every 2 weeks, or every week, every 3 weeks, depends how long your sprint is. And that first one is really important, setting up user testing, which we'll talk a little bit about more. So this is our example of a user story, which is the Agile version of requirements, but it's a different thing. So a story like this would have come out of a real user testing and user needs finding that admins really do need that. And then there would probably be a wireframe attached for a design for this metrics dashboard that has been tested with users already. So we're not going to waste very expensive engineering time to build the metrics dashboard described in this story, unless we know that it's going to be pretty much like the final, not the final version, but a working version of it that will meet the user's needs. And so then this is like sort of the final task, another big task of the product owner, which is prioritizing the backlog. So on the right, you see a list of user stories. So each of these represents something small. Could be logging in, could be logging out, could be submitting and uploading a document or submitting a form. And every day, the product owner is in there kind of working with this, and every 2 weeks, they break off a chunk and put it in order for the next sprint. And if you open these up, this is where you find that description that we showed on the last page with all the details. In my experience in this project, and then in the other one that I am working with the team here at DT on, a good user story takes a developer like at max, like maybe 1 to 3 days, and they may be able to knock off several small ones in a day. So you don't want to let user stories get too big. If it's going to take an engineer longer than that, you need to probably break it up into smaller pieces. But we actually estimate user stories not with time, but with points. So if you do start practicing Agile, there's a lot to learn there about how to manage that workflow. And then the other thing that we're really doing differently on this project than some city development has worked in the past is that we're doing user-centered design. Everyone in the city really cares about their users, and everyone who builds digital services in the city really tries to meet the needs of their users. We don't have customers, we don't have to worry about revenue, so we really are always worried about meeting their needs. But user-centered design is a set of practices and techniques that can help you get there, can help you achieve the same goal that everyone has, which is to build something that really helps their users get what they want. So it's really, it is a discipline. It is like a teachable art. It's like learning how to code. You can learn how to do user-centered design. So that's what we're doing on this project. A key part of it, and the key question to ask yourself if you're thinking about building products in this new way is, are you committed to doing meaningful user testing? We are doing user testing every week, every Wednesday, with real housing applicants, real people who are applying for housing. We bring them in, they sit there for an hour with our designers and our UX expert. Occasionally we'll take a week off or put it on pause if design gets too far ahead of the engineers. But we really see this as fundamental, and nothing gets built unless it's been user tested, because we don't want to, again, waste that engineering time and have to redo it later. I really like this graphic in the top right, what you think users do and what users actually do. I think there's actually a third circle that's missing, which is what users tell you they will do. So like, if you ask a user, like, what are you going to want to search for? Or like, are you going to want to make notes on this? Like, they're always going to give you a hypothesis that's not quite right. The only way to learn is to actually sit them down and see what they search for and see if they like have the urge to make a note after they do the thing, you know? And so that's what user testing is really about. Some of the benefits, like we've talked about these a little bit, but reducing costs, reducing time, decreasing your need in the future for support and training, and decreasing user errors, and then also just making people like your product more. Like they'll come back more often, they'll tell their friends about it. It's that sort of user satisfaction. There's a lot of activities you can do and that we are doing, starting with user research interviews all the way down to like testing clickable prototypes that you then iterate on before you build them. And doing usability testing, which I expect Cindy may touch on a little bit later around accessibility. These are some early designs for the affordable housing application. This was a clickable prototype, so nothing was happening as you filled this out on the back end. It was really just a working mock-up, but it really helped us learn what was going on. So, for example, those little question mark tooltips you see next to Ellis Act and Certificate of Preference, nobody clicked on those. We found out that no one knew what those meant or used them, which we had assumed they would, right? That goes back to those predictions or assumptions. So we changed the design, and now it actually says the description of each of those underneath it. We got rid of those tooltips, and we never would have known that except for user testing. Another one on that first screen on the far left, people were clicking on 123 Main Street, which actually took them back to the listing. And so we made that not a link, and we made the Get Started button much bigger and more prominent. So again, you would never know this until you put it in front of a user and see how they respond. And I think that's all we've got.
Yeah, just one more quick point to that. The user-centered design, it saves a lot of time and grief when it comes to support too. So had we had that link still there and it's confusing, you're going to get a lot more phone calls and a lot more emails. by fixing that, we reduce.
Great, that is awesome. So we have time for questions. If anybody online wants to share, I'm going to put on camera so people can see your faces, if that's all right. Let's see. And let's go back here. All right. There you are. So I have a question just to start. How did all this happen? How did you make such a shift in how you develop services and products for your users? And what was the political buy-in that needed to happen with leadership to make this a reality?
It was good timing. It was good timing and luck. So I had been struggling with this huge project for a number of years. And it just so happens I got introduced to a department called the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation.
I've heard of them.
Yes. And they wanted to get involved. And this one person, Ashley Myers, was very adept at, Agile. So actually the whole team pushed this Agile process. And it's the first time I heard of it. And we said, you know what? Everything else did not work. And it was like, yeah, it was a no-brainer. And it was, the biggest challenge was how do you write that into an RFP?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's it's open-ended, you can't be too open-ended and things like that. But once we got started, we're getting stuff done. We're getting stuff done very quickly. Which we just never got there before.
Yeah, I think that's right. We really relied on the help of our external partners. So we we had a Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation program called Civic Bridge to bring in pro bono corporate support last summer. And MoCD was paired with a team from Google, 3 Googlers giving a large amount of their time, really thanks to Google, the company, as an impact project. And the 3 of them weren't explicitly working on Agile, but they were very much an influence, I think, in helping us shape our approach and helping us practice user-centered design for the first time. And then when it came to learning and procuring Agile, I reached out to my network of folks at the White House, 18F, and USDS who have been doing this and got a lot of coaching on, okay, so we want to do Agile, but how do we do that in a government RFP procurement context? Yeah.
Great. Other questions from folks in the room? I'll keep asking it. One more. What are you most excited about as far as the success you've seen? Like, what's been the most transformative part of this process, and how will that influence the work that you do going forward?
Seeing a product. Seeing an actual product. So we actually have below market rate rental listings. They're live. They're out. You can go to housing.sfgov.org. So that's one thing, and just seeing how much less time and money it took to get there versus the old way, and also just having the users, our stakeholders, my colleagues actually see something finally come to fruition versus when is that coming? When is that coming? So, and they'll get to see, it's exciting because they'll get to see every few months something new and something new and something new instead of having to wait forever, and they like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the speed at which we're delivering and then also seeing it spread. So like we have 2 other projects, at least 2 that I'm aware of in the Department of Technology where we're now practicing Agile and user-centered design. So that's awesome.
That is great. Question?
Sure. Thinking about digital services and the housing portal, now that you've got it up and it's out there, where do you go next? What are the next steps? Do you have a timeline? What's the end goal?
We have a roadmap. We have a roadmap. We showed you some of the list of things. So this is just the beginning. So this is actually probably going to take us out another 2 years, 2.5 years to incorporate all of the programs and all of the features that we want. So like we said, we're just going to launch setting up their own accounts and online applications. But the online applications are only for one piece of one program. So once we get those going, then we can go to the next program and their applications, and we build on what we've had until all of MoCD's affordable housing programs are part of this system, and until it is a one-stop shopping for anybody looking for affordable housing resources in the city. So again, we see that about a year, 2 years out. After that, it's just a question of it's maintenance, it's upkeep, it's more improvements.
Yeah. I would also say, like, outside the housing portal, as some of you guys probably know, the city's making big strides around digital services. So we passed the city's first ever digital services strategy. The Department of Technology has done sort of a reorg to create a digital services and products team with folks who are already working in that area, but maybe not with that title and in the same place. And so, an opportunity to continue those practices here in this department. And then the city's recruiting for a chief digital services officer. So spread the word.
Good plug. One more question, then we'll let you go about your Agile and user-centered design day. A question from Ethan Guy online, and he asks, how did you determine your stakeholders and users, and how did you address access issues during the design process?
That's a great question. Stakeholders, I think, was pretty obvious to us. There's the leaders and the business team inside of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. We have a steering committee of leaders across the city who work on housing-related stuff, including things that aren't in scope right now. We have the task force. So we have a lot of groups meeting to give us input. We have a task force of housing counselors, developers, property managers. As I said, we test with real users. So we actually have a 20,000 person listserv at the city for housing, and we hit them up and said, do you want to user test our new tools? And people actually responded, and we've been scheduling real housing searchers to test with us.
And actually, part of the strategy, having these task force and these housing counselors and everybody involved kind of early on, and us talking to them on a monthly basis or asking them and showing them prototypes. Part of that was just strategy. One, it was to get honest feedback, but the other part was that they were involved early on in building this system, so that when we roll it out, it's like, oh yeah, that's the system we've been looking at. Yeah, so total buy-in.
And we're changing a lot of stuff about the process, like we're not just bringing the existing process online, and so we needed that buy-in to help us change rules, change procedures, change like
literally
office
change
size
an application.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Mm.
Around accessibility, I think was the second question there. We are testing with the Lighthouse of the Blind and the Mayor's Office of Disability with impaired users. We did our best to sort of like meet a checklist, but I think I won't say too much more about that because I think Cindy's going to talk a lot about how to get that right. But one of our most exciting like nerd moments was that we had been using some patterns from the U.S. Federal design standards and discovered some accessibility issues with one of the ways that they do. I think it was a label or a button, and got to actually do a pull request to improve the federal design standards that got accepted based on our testing with real users.
Wow,
so that was fun.
That's awesome. All right, one more quick question. This one's from Jeremy Goldberg. So we need to answer it, but it's a good question. How did you communicate the user design process? Because it seems to be like a language unto its own and probably foreign to some folks in how in the city and how they're used to. It's jargon. So how did you communicate what it was, the value of it?
What are your thoughts on that?
How did we communicate
I think we
it?
showed it to them.
Yeah. So, and again, this isn't, we weren't used to doing this, and, we weren't used to taking the time up front instead of, investing that time. So I think, for our team, they basically said, run with this the way you think is best. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. And so it wasn't like, we got pushed back, like, why are you taking so long to do this or that? Actually, I did explain to management, we're going to do it this way now, and we're going to test with users beforehand, because as you've seen in the past, if we do it, at the end, we wind up having to go back and change everything. And they dug it. They were actually very into it. And that was a way to explain it without, having to get into any kind of jargon.
Yeah. And MoCD's management is super receptive to the learnings from that. So if we're in a meeting and they're like, well, I think it should look this way, they've gotten to the point now they're like, but wait, what did the users say? Or like, what did the user testing show? And so even they have learned to like not trust your own predictions or hypotheses, and instead really only trust the evidence.
Great. Thank you so much,
Thank
Ashley
you.
and Michael, for your speech with this presentation.
Thank
Thank you for having
All
us.
Should we
So-
slide out of the way?
Yeah, we will go ahead and just rotate. Hello again, everybody. So let's see here. We're going to have Tiffany come over. All right. So Tiffany Andrews, Code for America. If you want to just do a brief introduction, and then we'll go ahead and pull up your slides. Does that sound good?
Pull up the slides.
All right, we'll go ahead and pull up the slides.
Good talking. But I'm Tiffany Andrews. I'm a product manager at Code for America. I came to Code for America through the fellowship last year in Indianapolis and got hired full-time to do product management. Actually, I have a background in government. I used to work for a couple elected officials down in the Southern California area as chief of staff. So I'm happy to be around fellow colleagues in this space. But yeah, so that's just kind of like my quick information. So if you have any further follow-up questions that might not get answered today, please feel free to send me an email. Enter. Here. Okay. So quick pitch about Code for America. Code for America is a tech nonprofit located right here in San Francisco. I work within we have 3 focus areas: economic development, safety and justice, and health. I work in the safety and justice space. The items in the red are 2 fellowship programs this year. One in Seattle, kind of working with creating a crisis management application so that can accompany their crisis management system that they recently implemented. The second fellowship is in Salt Lake County, created a 2-way platform for caseworkers to communicate with their clients who are currently on parole. The 3 projects that we are currently working on internally are Jail Dashboard, which is a jail management dashboarding system. We have selected 4 different agencies to redeploy this in. It was originally created in Louisville, Kentucky, back in 2013. Comport, which is another kind of like data sharing, decision-making application, which my team built last year in Indianapolis. It shows complaints, officer-involved shootings, and use of force data at the incident level right now for the Indianapolis Police Department. And at the end of this year, we'll have Baltimore, Louisville, as well as Santa Rosa, California, using this product as well. So we're super excited to be expanding that product. And then the third one is kind of our re-entry clean slate application that's currently called Clear My Record, which is being used here in San Francisco with the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. And we're expanding it into other Bay Area counties, one being Alameda County, and we're kind of working out the details with the 3rd county as well. So it's just a way for individuals that do have a record that is looking to see if they qualify to get it reclassified or expunged. So let's dig into the fun stuff. I'm going to sit here and kind of walk you through the process of product road mapping. So kind of, I'm going to share the presentation before I walk you through how did you guys kind of create a product vision, what the goals were, kind of the procedures that you use in terms of moving it forward. I'm going to take you on that 3rd level down, and we're going to dig deep into this product roadmap. But kind of like, what in the world is this? What is the product roadmap? Why do I need it? If I already have a strategy plan, why do I need a product roadmap? It's really a key document that helps you really be able to stay on track in terms of what the vision is and what the markers that you need to do in order to make that come to fruition. It's a living document. So it's not some PowerPoint that you just showed at city council meeting or to your city manager, and then it kind of goes into the filing cabinet. It's best if it's kind of like an Excel or Word document that is always visible, that clearly outlines what the goals are, what your key features that you're wanting to implement, and then metrics. So what level of success once that feature has reached kind of deployment, what does that look like? Is it just that it's working and someone's able to download, or is it like now you have 10,000 users coming onto the site? But it really helps you be able to break things down in small pieces and within a certain time frame in order for you to collectively meet those goals moving forward. It's also a good document that is used across teams. So since you all are starting to work with either internal and external development, it's really a good way for people to know what the next steps are and be able to visually see where they are within that. This is something that has been really helpful for us as we've been moving through our pilots. So instead of it being like, can this be done by August? And instead of being like, no, it'll be like, these are the next steps in order for us to get this feature complete. so everyone knows what stake that they have within making that goal a reality. So why? It reveals the system's direction. It signals the release that the product team and creates kind of expectations and exposes a system or team's values. So it helps you no matter what other stakeholders come in or what new things happen. It really helps you stay focused on what the product is supposed to be doing and why you're doing it and moving it forward. It helps you stay honest and also to who your users are. Because so many times we all get these really great 3 a.m. ideas that we want to implement, but a lot of times it might not necessarily be as a higher value as you may think to the user. So how do you do this product map? A good way that I came across in researching it is kind of like, instead of having another meeting, make it an exciting event. Call it a product summit where you're bringing all of the different stakeholders to the table. So who are your key users? Who's going to possibly be marketing this? The developers, kind of who's going to be managing the product, any designers, if there's someone that you foresee being like having to change policies, whether internally or externally, everyone needs to come to this product roadmap summit. You take what you've already decided on, what the vision and the goals are. You make sure that everyone is still on the same page with what the vision and the goals are, and be clear on who your user is. I can't stress enough how important it is to be very clear on who your user is. Also, the second thing is to just let it be a space when you're first opening up the meeting, just to share ideas. No idea really is a bad idea at this phase. People can also share feature requests, grievances, customer comments, stakeholder input. So as you guys were doing in the last, with the housing portal, going to all of those different meetings, this is a great place to just put it all on the table, just for people to start to see what's there. And this is kind of like a quick Post-it activity that you can do. Everyone grab a Post-it, one idea per Post-it, and place it up on the board. I can't stress enough, one idea per Post-it. If you have 20 Post-its, it is very well a-okay. And then from there, you really want to start categorizing. So clustering by themes. So these are sometimes what some individuals may call like your roadmap inputs or what your goals are. So are there kind of core functionality features that some of the ideas all cluster into? Do we start to see that there's going to necessarily need to be a process change, either in workflow or in policy? So those things need to go together as well. And a good way is kind of like, another example is right here. If you look on the left, it kind of shows the inputs and then all the clusters of Post-it notes that go into that, whether if it's feedback driven, if it's scale in terms of we're really looking for this product to grow and move forward. It adds business value. The key features will just definitely improve the quality. And then fourth, which is the biggest part, is prioritizing. Prioritize, and then prioritize again. Everything is tested against your goal, and your goal is tested against who your users are. So all of these things are very well connected. If you start to realize that there are kind of two distinct goals in mind, separate them into two different roadmaps. Make sure there's a clear vision for each one of them, and that then you can stack them so that they'll be running at the same time, so that people can be still working in conjunction with each other to move your tech feature forward. But it's important not to add and lump everything into one roadmap. If you start to see that there is very clear kind of ways you can draw a line in the sand, because it's very well that whoever is managing the product can manage 3 roadmaps all at the same time because of the way in which they'll be laid out, which I'll definitely start to go show you examples. And then whenever you get stuck, test. So this is kind of like a good quadrant, kind of like where is the value to the customer, and then the cost, difficulty, or risk to develop. If it's high, which is like a high development risk, which is the quadrant 1, and low on the customer value added, then those are not features that need to be prioritized. Everything in kind of quadrant 4, which is high value to the customer, low risk, costs, or difficulty to develop, those are definitely things that you want to prioritize, and then kind of move to quadrant 2 and 3 in terms of that way. It's just a good way to really, when you can't come to an agreement because the mayor wants one thing and developers are like, that will take forever. These are different ways in which you can do it. Also look at ways in which you can break kind of big features down into smaller components, because if you can break a big feature down into a smaller component, it actually, in its bite-sized pieces, may actually add a little bit more value at a lower cost. And then after you kind of like work through that, it's really good to assemble a product map. You don't have to download a new kind of software. You can easily use an Excel sheet or a Google sheet. Make it visible. Have it be one of the things every single time you're meeting with all the different parties that everyone has a copy of. They go over, you double check and make sure that we're all on the same page. We're going to be meeting kind of like these feature goals and deadlines. And if not, we need to then start to address how we can change that. But I can't stress how big it can be for it to be visible, because once people can see it, it's something that they know that they're moving consistently forward together. I've also just have like different links to templates that you can use, or another way for that. But the biggest thing is kind of this beautiful example of it. And if you see, there's definitely more than one roadmap in here. So you have the marketing team, you have the mobile team, and a web team. And then on the side, you have the goals, and each of those are color coded into when do you see these things starting to begin, how long, and then when will they end. A lot of times it's easier to break things up into bite-sized pieces, so you can look at what is our goal for the quarter. Within the next 3 months, where do we want to go to, and then work back from there. So within the next 2 weeks, what are we going to really focus on? So the web team will probably focus on breaking down the bite size of improving like the new admin console. So they'll have so many different things that they'll need to do in order to get that. If at any point in time something seems too big, go back, call a meeting, bring everyone back to the table, and really look at different bite-sized ways in which that can really be broken down. So yeah, so it's kind of my shtick. Are there any questions?
Great.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Tiffany, I'm wondering if you can share a time when a particular project or product was really challenging and where the roadmap, you're talking sort of about some general ways in which it's helpful, but I'm wondering if you could share an example.
Yeah, it probably actually happened just last week. We were working with one of our pilot sites for our Comport project, and it kind of came down that one of their stakeholders was really interested in wanting to like get the site live, get everything up and live. And they were like, when can we do it? When can we do it? And so instead of being like, we could definitely do it by September, I was like, let's go back to our product roadmap. Let's share that with them. Let's revise it, because obviously the last time that we shared it out, we've completely passed that deadline. So we need to communicate why we passed that deadline. And it was obvious that we didn't follow the roadmap. We didn't break down like things in small enough chunks. So one of the reasons that it was past deadline is that our website updates are taking longer than expected. So we needed to then kind of communicate that out and let them know what are the next steps in terms of that happening, and where do they kind of plug into that in order for them to see that. So that's kind of, yeah, so now we're back on track, and be on the lookout for those updates.
So we have a question from Cindy in the room. You want to ask it yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
I just know that when I start a project, there's so many unknowns and so many things that can't be done, like they're unknowable. And especially because of product romance starts to talk about dates. So when is the project like in a mature enough state to start producing this? Because on day one, it definitely doesn't feel like that would be the right time to start, because you're putting dates to things. So when in the project do you think like is the sweet spot where like you're starting to have enough information to build something that's not perfect because it's always evolving, but sort of has some meat to it and can be relied on.
I guess I would even like step back and don't be so quick to set dates. I think that's where kind of like a lot of times the pitfalls really start to happen, because it's easy to underestimate, and because I know that I still tend to overestimate, and still things consistently were like over deadline, which kind of drove me crazy a lot this year. So I wouldn't be so quick to like be like, by this time we'll definitely have it done, but to step back and just say, if we're going to start out with user testing what we have, these are the things that we need to do. We need to create kind of what our template is. We know we need to show it to these individuals before we go out, just so everyone starts to know like where in the process things are moving. And if they're still like pressing it, I would say this is a tentative date, but I would more resort back to what the next steps are. Even if you haven't got to like a full roadmap, but instead of timelining it out with dates, timelining it out with steps.
So you would, quick follow-up question. So you would have something like this, but without the calendar at the top?
I think this to go to then move forward from there. I feel like you could have something like this without the calendar and just say within the quarter, what is it where we're really wanting to do? So maybe in Q1, since it's so big, when we're at the beginning stage, we really just want a user test. Mm-hmm. And from there, at the beginning of Q2, we want to go back and then start to develop this in Q2.
So maybe it sounds like you would do it from almost or very early on, like almost day one or very early on, but just like hold it really lightly, like the closer you are to the beginning, the more it could change, or? Yeah,
I think I would really hold it super lightly, but I think I still would be very loose as I'm even moving through. Because I think people need to know that it is a living document, and as long as you consistently are open and honest and keeping it up to date, then it's a lot easier to drive the product forward. But this at times at the beginning stage to just jump right in and do this and share it out wide with my government partners was like, what? So I had to go back and go within a format that they were used to, which was kind of like a basic timeline and being like, oh, for the next 3 months, these are the next steps that we're looking to take. If we successfully complete these, then we can go, then we can start talking about the next steps. So instead of it going like completely horizontal, just to kind of really break it down. And then once you know what like your strategy and your vision is, then you can kind of start to build out a lot more. But then I think this is why it needs to be a living document, because at any point in time, your developer could be like, our third-party integration is literally, we're running into issues and it's gonna take us another 3 weeks than we expected. And then that day can move and then people know, in the meantime, this is how we're moving forward and this is where you'll be asked to participate. I think the worst thing to do is where you look at this and you're like, okay, cool, I'm not needed until May. And then May comes and goes and no one's contacted me. And then so I'm like, what's going on? So I think it's really important to consistently communicate with all parties, and then providing ways for them to contribute from the beginning. Because I think it's easy to be like, oh, wait, we need to now bring in this person at the last minute. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. What other hurdles have you run into with government partners? It sounds like there's a cultural sort of education that needs to happen around some of the systems or process, but what else have you run into that might be good for the group to know about ahead of time?
Working with databases provide a lot of different challenges in terms of cleaning the data, understanding the data architecture of it as well. So if you are looking to really dive deep into your databases that you probably have had for a long time, or if you're looking to onboard a new database, bring everyone to the table at the beginning of the meeting and really actually run your tables yourself and consume your own data so that you're then also starting to know where are fields that aren't being filled out properly. So I think that's one of the biggest things in terms of what I kind of see as like a huge roadblocker that has been for us. I'm trying to think in some of the other projects, actually showing ways in which to do user testing with the community. All of our government partners have been super open to it, but really providing a way in which what does that look like outside of a regular like community meeting where it's like a ask me anything, I'm here to hear, you know, what your issues are, but like how do you actively really get a usable feedback from the community, and then what challenging work do you need to do to locate the people that aren't already showing up at community meetings. So those have kind of been a little bit of a roadblock. I mean, I think we've come up with clever ways in which we could do it, whether if it's through our brigade program. Code for America has a kind of volunteer arm of this work, but also it's sometimes just showing up at other just community meetings or finding out where our users are. That might be unexpected. So for Clear My Record, going to like after school programs where parents are and letting them know that this is a program that is made available with them. So then also contacting like health and human service providers. So just really kind of thinking outside of the box in which where we can just collect a flow of people and not fully relying on mailing lists or different meetings that we already have, because we know that that is probably a catch basin of people that we're completely missing. But yeah, so just kind of like showing and getting a lot more creative sometimes has been a little bit of a challenge because it also takes us out of our comfort zones as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question before we move on.
Yeah.
That's okay. So can you talk a little bit about feature prioritization and maybe how the product roadmap can help you in that respect?
Yeah.
Especially in context of the waterfall approach, which we heard about earlier, and I think a lot of government staff are used to operating in waterfall, and the agile approach is like, let's do everything, but not all at once. And so prioritization becomes really critical.
Yeah. So, like for instance, we're just like showing out with this. Normally, also in Agile, you tend to test a lot more. So within the new admin console, you're probably going to test. From that feedback, you would want to go back to this and really kind of put it back through your quadrant and really start to look at, okay, based off of what we heard, what are the features that we're looking to do next? What are people suggesting that we change, and where does that really fall within the value of it is kind of what we normally do. We really go back into terms of asking that consistently and running through that. Sometimes I think give yourself time. Like that's the biggest thing I could say when it comes to prioritization is to allow yourself time to not only synthesize your user research, but then also to schedule meetings or a work session to really run through this. And at any point in time when you start to see people are kind of burning out, take a break. I can't stress enough. It sounds like, oh yes, of course, but like take a break, get snacks. People cannot talk about this at all for a moment, because once you kind of have a breather and you come back, you'll really start to see like this isn't a core priority, or maybe this can be moved to a different roadmap because it actually really is more closely connected with marketing instead of connected with the further development of the product. But it's really prioritizing things really based on like the level of kind of effort on your end, but also more what is truly the value of the customer. So I think you have to consistently also be open to being uncomfortable and a lot of your assumptions being challenged.
Yeah.
So definitely, especially with future prioritization, what you may have thought was super important to the user won't be, and then let that be your guide in terms of prioritizing what they're looking for next. And that's something that we also did with our Clear My Record as we were moving through. I think we thought like people definitely want phone calls and want to be emailed, and really they just wanted to know where they were in the process and how. and how can they really find out if they didn't get a letter, what are the next steps that they need to do. A lot of the other kind of features that we thought were really most important weren't, and also some of the features that our partner at the same time was requesting for weren't as a big priority to the customer, which was our user at that time. So it doesn't mean that we throw them out. Do not throw any feature suggestions away. That's also what I could say. Just keep them in what we sometimes call like a backlog of things. But then also, if there are features that have information from the user in terms of why they don't work, that's also key information that needs to be very well correlated to that feature so that it doesn't come back up again in the future. People also know like why we didn't go with a download document button in a certain place.
Great, thank you. Okay, coming up next. Would you like to drive that? We will have Cindy come over. We'll go ahead and let you say hello, Cindy.
Hello, Cindy. Hi, my name is Cindy Conway. I work for the Department of Technology for the City of San Francisco as an engineer, and primarily I'm working on the Affordable Housing Project right now. Or I was working on the Affordable Housing Project. I work on the Office of Short-Term Rental Project.
Great. Let me open up here. Screen share here. Okay.
Enthusiastic. Okay, so I'm going to talk. Oh, my chair's very squeaky. I'm going to talk a little bit today about accessibility. It's a very involved topic, and so there wasn't really a way to do it justice in such a short amount of time. But we wanted it to be fairly hands-on. So I'm going to cover a few like high-level concepts, just sort of language and lingo that you might encounter when talking about accessibility, and then sort of just give you like if you have very limited resources and accessibility is a hard thing for you to attain on your website or app, sort of like just do this basic minimum testing. But nothing that I can go through today can make up for actually doing user testing in the way that was described by all our speakers so far today. And you know, testing with users who have disabilities should just be part of the pool of people you're always testing with, in addition to folks who don't have disabilities. So the law, this part is really dry. Oh, I should have one more slide. This is the definition according to Wikipedia of what accessibility is. I think more briefly, it's just about making sure that everybody has access to electronic information. And that's particularly important for government agencies because the kind of information that we provide can be really critical to somebody's well-being. And then I like to touch on some of the laws just very briefly because when I first started, I was hearing a lot of acronyms and legislation thrown around, and it was helpful to kind of just get my head around a little bit about what they are. So the American with Disability Act is actually a civil rights law, and it prohibits any kind of discrimination by the government on basis of disability. The part that we care about, particularly when it comes to websites and apps, is Title II of that act, and it requires that all programs offered through the state and local government, such as the City of San Francisco, be made accessible to everyone regardless of disabilities. The other thing you'll hear about is the Federal Rehabilitation Act. That really started out as like an act to make sure people had access to jobs, but it's gotten a lot broader. And the section in there that you really care about, and you'll hear about this a lot, Section 508, it requires that federal agencies make all their electronic information accessible to people with disabilities. And so that's really why it plays a key part, and you'll hear it a lot when it comes to websites and applications. But it's very broad. And so if you want to dig deeper about how to actually do that, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the international body that sets standards for the web. So they're the ones who come up with standards for basic things like HTML or JavaScript. They also have standards for how to make websites accessible. So there's the Web Accessibility Initiative, which sort of digged into that. And then they came up from there with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a technical reference you can go to. At the end of these slides, there's a link to it. And it really digs into detail about how to create accessible websites. It's very in-depth information. It's very technical information. And so some of the steps that I'm going to show you a little bit later are kind of like a little higher level. But if you really wanted to dig deep, that would be the way to go. And then we also have the Rich Internet Application Standards, which help information be more interoperable for folks with disabilities. So let's talk about the users a little bit. I know that when I first started doing this, I would immediately think about people who are blind, because the information we see is visual, but it actually impacts folks with a much broader range of disabilities. So people with low vision, people who are colorblind. If you're presenting any kind of auditory or visual information, it impacts people who are deaf or who are hard of hearing. It can impact people who have cognitive impairments like attention disorders or learning disorders. And it can affect people with physical mobility, physical issues like some of our testing that we've done, we've come across people who just really struggle to use a mouse. They don't have the fine motor skills to use a mouse. So sort of how does that impact them? When you're talking about people who have visual impairments, you want to convert the information to audio. You want to avoid small types or strange typefaces. Dispersed layouts can make things more difficult, and you want to be really conscious of conveying meaning with color, because there's a significant portion of the population that are colorblind and they won't be able to get the intention that you're conveying with red versus green, for example, as good and bad. For people who have hearing impairments, you want to be closed captioning, audio information. Transcripts can also be very useful. It's great to provide both, and I'll get into that a little bit later. For folks with cognitive impairments, you want to make sure your information is easy to understand, clean, simple, not complex, not necessarily like complex, convoluted information. And then you want to, for people with physical impairments, you want to make sure that they can use alternate devices and don't necessarily have to use, for example, a mouse or a touch screen. Okay, so here I'll go through some of our very high-level, simple testing techniques. Again, I'll reiterate, this isn't everything you should do, but this is a way to get started. Keyboard navigation. This is one of my favorite things to do because it's so easy to do and helps so many people. You can just unplug your mouse and make sure that you can completely navigate your website with your keyboard, and that'll help people who are blind, who have low vision, and who are mobilely impaired. We like to call attention to focus states. So a lot of browsers by default started out by really showing where the focus was on a button, for example, on your page. But designers sort of decided, oh, that's ugly, like that big blue box around the button. And so a lot of the times you'll see focus state demonstrated the way the middle button is here on settings, where you can't really tell. It's just like a slightly different color. And also it's color conveying meaning, which can be a problem. And so we want to really encourage people to allow that focus state to shine, because if you're not using a mouse, you need to know where the focus is on your application, because you're always navigating from where that focus is, up or down. High contrast mode. A lot of people with low vision use the high contrast mode on their device. That's something that you can set on your operating system. Windows supports it, Mac supports it. And it's really useful to put your device in that mode and look at your site, because especially images can start to show up like looking very odd. If you haven't taken that into account, that helps people with low vision and light sensitivity. This is an example of what your website might look like, or this slide might look like, again, high contrast mode. Color contrast is very important. It helps people who have low eyesight or vision impairment, and it also can help people who are colorblind depending on the level of their color blindness. And so you can see here that you want a ratio of 4.15 to 1 for fonts that are less than 24 pixels. And I'll show you a tool that can help you find out where on your site you're not meeting that criteria. Oh, I'm not sure why that slide isn't showing up well, but the where you could only see a black box, that was this slide in black and white. And we would typically pose the question to the room, like, what fields are in error on this particular slide? And it was very hard to tell because you couldn't see the red outlines. All you could see was that in the bottom text box where it says code, there was like a little warning icon in there, but you couldn't really tell that the other ones are errored out. I also call attention to CAPTCHA. That can be really tricky for people who have visual impairments. And so you always want to make sure you select a CAPTCHA tool that allows an audio option so that they can hear it as well in order to data enter. Another quick and easy thing to do is to just turn off the images in your site. Most browsers allow you to do that. I've put the instructions here for Firefox where you can go under Tools, Options, Content, and just uncheck Load Images Automatically. And that's a good way to go through your site to see if any meaning is all of a sudden lost. Like, did you have a big stop sign on the page to call people's attention that they should really go here? And then when that image is gone, your call to action is lost. This is another example of where using images to convey meaning can become problematic. If you're using these images and you turn them off, then all of a sudden, like, how do we know what's going on? Captioning and transcripts. So this can actually help a really large number of people, deaf, hard of hearing, low vision, cognitively impaired, because you take the information, of course, that's audiovisual and you turn it into text and in closed captioning. The one thing I will say about this is that if you can provide both, it can be really useful. If you provide closed captioning on video, that's great, because in addition to seeing the text, they see the context in which the dialogue took place, which is very helpful. But it makes it a lot harder to quickly suss out information. If you're reading a web page, you can like scan and quickly get to what you want, which could be a really hard process if you're trying to watch a video for 20 minutes to get to the piece 21 minutes in that you care about. So it can be helpful to provide both. Turning off CSS can also help a lot of people, and it's a good practice in general just for design. It makes sure that your HTML, in geek terms, is semantic, that your HTML is actually conveying the structure of the data that it's displaying. And it's amazing, all of a sudden when you turn off the CSS, you really see the data for what it is. You see it a lot more closely to how a screen reader is going to interpret the information. And again, that's really easy to do by just going into whatever browser. They all support it, but Firefox, you can go View, Page Style, and select No Styling. A little more information about links, and this has to do with how screen readers work. So when you load up a site in a screen reader, the first thing that it does is it identifies all the links on the page, and it comes up in like a menu on the left-hand side. And so if you've put a bunch of click here or read more links, maybe you have a blog and you haven't bothered to link to any of the texts, but there's like read more where you can expand the body of the blog. Someone who's visually impaired or blind is just going to see read more, read more, read more, read more, read more, and have no ability to know what that read more is about. And so it's really important to have descriptive links. Yeah, so there's a lot of tools in the market for automatically auditing your site to see how compliant it is. I like this one as a starter because it's really easy to use. So if you go to HTML Code Sniffer and you add the link to your browser, you can see on this slide, it's like right up here. Then once you're on any website, you can click that link and it'll produce this report here that you see on the right. So you can see that this website has 20 errors, 39 warnings, and 68 notices. And maybe most importantly, right up here in the corner, you can decide how compliant your site needs to be. So you could be 508 compliant, which is much less strict than, for example, the WCAG compliance. And then once you click on errors, it'll give you a list of exactly what the 28 errors are. You can get even more information by digging in, and it will put an error, like an arrow on the page to show you exactly what element is failing. This is one of my favorite resources that I like to pass along. 18F did an excellent job of creating a checklist for people who are getting started out with accessibility. It goes through some of the stuff that I've talked about today and even more. And this this nav on the left here allows you to really zero in. So you can click on forms or frames or page titles. And once you get in there, not only will it give you information about accessibility, but it'll give you a sample, one that works according to how it should and one that presents a problem and how you can test for that. And just one last note about compliance. The director for our Office on Disability made this point early on when I started working on this, and I think she was very right that when you make a site more accessible, and in general, when you make any of the services the government provides more accessible, you're not just helping that population, you end up helping everybody because you're just doing a better, more eloquent job of what your undertaking is. And so I think this is a great example where we have a picture of this ramp that's supposed to be used for someone in a wheelchair to get to from like a park to a higher up sidewalk. And I bet you that that is completely compliant. I bet you the grade on the ramp is correct. I bet you the turn radius is correct, but it's really difficult to use. And it's not aesthetically pleasing to anybody who's in the park. Whereas you could look at an example more like this, where now this has been made accessible. It still meets all the requirements, but everybody has benefited from having this. Mm-hmm. You know, I think another great example is like if you're taking the Muni or the bus and the stops are presented in a visual way, like on the light boards. And that helps everybody, right? Not just people who need to be able to read the sign or hear the cue. These are some of the resources we have that I mentioned in the presentation today. And that's about it.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Cindy.
So we have one question about product development teams, but want to ask anybody in the room if they have questions for Cindy about accessibility or anyone online that's listening, if they have any questions. I'll just ask what you're excited about as far as accessibility improvements in San Francisco and services and products. Anything in particular on the horizon that you are particularly excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about the Affordable Housing Portal. I think that they have done an exceptional job of doing accessibility from the start in the application instead of having to circle back and do it, which is more expensive and much less efficient. And they've achieved that by setting that as a goal from the onset of the project and by making sure that they were testing with folks with disability throughout the project.
Great. Yeah, it's an awesome project.
Yeah.
Any questions from? All right, well, oh yeah, please.
Speaking of testing with folks with user disabilities, how do you go about setting up the tests, since they're, I would imagine, a little bit different from the visually coherent?
Yeah.
The correct terminology is for that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on the population that you're targeting. Many of them have advocacy groups. And so reaching out can be a good opportunity to connect with users willing to do testing. And then you also have to make sure you have the right equipment, and those groups can help with that as well. I know that the library has been used for those purposes because they have things like screen readers that can help with testing. And maybe Ashley can chime in too. How have you guys done that?
With Lighthouse for the Blind and the Mayor's Office of Disability. So you're on the STAR team, right? No.
No. Patrick Liddy. No.
Oh.
CFA. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyone at a city department can totally reach out to the Lighthouse for the Blind or the Mayor's Office of Disability, and they will happily work with you. I mean, they're busy people and they have a lot of priorities, so I think it's a coordination effort. But those are two groups in San Francisco who really have a vested interest in this, and so that's who we worked with on the housing portal. I imagine that a lot of community nonprofits who do like direct case work probably also could think of some clients you could test with, but that they might have a harder time coming up with many user testers. Yeah, I don't know if you know how they've done it, where they how they set up the user testing station. I'm assuming Lighthouse or MOD had like machines with a setup that the users would need, like with screen readers installed or that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, any other accessibility questions? No? Okay, so there's a question from, let's see here. Just go ahead and.
Let's ask a question, I think.
Okay, so the question is, for the product development teams, are these a mix of public and non-public? For teams with private experts, is an RFP still involved in bringing in the private team? And if not, what's the alternative? So Ashley or Michael or
What?
maybe.
I think I know what
Question.
she's saying. Are they city staff or are they hired contractors? I think it's sort of the question. You can do it with either. Some city departments, including the Department of Technology, have web developers and designers on staff and someone who can serve in a product management role. And so we are doing this with in-house teams. For example, with a product that we're building for the Office of Short-Term Rentals, who does Airbnb and VRBO and other platform regulation of hosts on those. You can also do this with a contractor, with a vendor, when you're hiring a web development and design consulting firm. So for the housing portal, we have had Cindy sort of serving as an internal team member around development, but she's at this point not doing active engineering work. All the engineering work is being done by consultants. I think, so yes, there is an RFP or an RFQ or some sort of solicitation and a contract. I think the key there, from our experience, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Michael, but my biggest learning has been that you need to find a vendor who's already practicing Agile and doing it well. It's you're already doing it for the first time as a government employee. It's like you don't also want a vendor who's learning how to do Agile or still, or willing to try it with you. So really finding a vendor who's already practicing this in a disciplined way and can help, set the tone and the culture and the framework, I think is really critical to success, which is a little hard because if you just put out a normal RFP, the kind of vendors who will naturally respond probably aren't.
But they're going to say they are. So everybody now says they're doing Agile. Yes, we do Agile. And what I'm finding with my experience is most of the time it's Agile/waterfall, mostly waterfall. So we were lucky enough. So we did, you can do an RFP, as Ashley said, in the city. That takes a very long time. We actually didn't have that much time. So the alternative for us was to go through the tech marketplace. You still have to go through, you still have to do kind of an RFP process, but it's much quicker because the tech marketplace vendors have already been, they're already qualified, they've already signed a contract with the city. There's still there's drawbacks to that as well because we pay a commission to the tech marketplace vendor through which we work with the actual developers. You just have to think about, the pluses and minuses of each. No matter what, though, it's going to take longer to procure than you think.
Yeah, and I think that the product owner or product manager role really needs to be a government employee. You could have a counterpart on the vendor side, but part of what's making this more successful is not letting the vendor just go off into the dark and do something and bring it back to you a few months later, but really being involved in a day-to-day way to make sure that the taxpayer money is being spent well and that that the process is going well.
Great. Well, thank you, Ashley and Michael and Cindy and Tiffany. Really great insight and inspiration for the other folks listening online. And we'll wrap up our Product Development 101 training, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.